The crash of ceramic against marble echoed through our penthouse as my hastily packed duffel bag landed on the pristine white steps of Meridian Towers. Snow swirled around me in the bitter February wind as I stood there, disbelieving, watching. My husband of 9 years slammed shut the mahogany door of our luxury apartment, the home overlooking downtown Seattle that I had secretly helped secure. "Don't you dare come crawling back," were Marcus's parting words, his voice dripping with the same contempt he'd shown for months. Little did he know, the certified letter tucked safely in my coat pocket would turn his world completely upside down. Before we dive back in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if this story resonates with you, don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is something truly special I can't wait to share. My name is Isabella Chen, and at 34, I never imagined I'd find myself standing in a Seattle snowstorm, locked out of my own life by the man who had once promised to cherish me forever. The bitter irony? Just 6 hours earlier, I had received news that would have solved every financial worry Marcus had been drowning in for the past 18 months. The very money troubles that had transformed him from a loving partner into a volatile stranger who saw me as nothing more than a burden weighing down his sinking ship. I pulled my phone from my trembling hands, the screen still glowing with the email that had arrived while Marcus was in his morning meeting. "We are pleased to inform you that the estate settlement for Dr. Helena Vasquez has been finalized. As the sole designated beneficiary, you are entitled to receive the sum of $4.2 million in liquid assets, plus real estate holdings valued at approximately $2.1 million. Helena, my beloved mentor from graduate school, the brilliant professor who had disappeared from academic circles 20 years ago to pursue private research in renewable energy technologies. The woman Marcus had always dismissed as that eccentric old bat who probably lived in a trailer somewhere. Thunder rumbled overhead as I stood on the sidewalk of Pine Street, snow mixing with the tears I refused to acknowledge in front of the doorman who pretended not to notice my humiliation. Mrs. Rodriguez from the apartment across the hall peered through her curtains, no doubt already composing the gossip she'd share at the next building committee meeting. I gathered what remained of my dignity and dragged my inadequately packed bag toward the parking garage, each step echoing the finality of what had just occurred. Marcus's rage had been building like a pressure cooker for weeks. His tech consulting firm, Apex Digital Solutions, where he served as chief strategy officer, had been hemorrhaging clients since their major data breach 6 months ago. Investors were fleeing, lawsuits were mounting, and the stress had transformed the charming, ambitious man I'd married into someone I barely recognized, irritable, paranoid, and increasingly cruel. Tonight had been the final explosion. I'd gently suggested that maybe we should consider scaling back our lifestyle temporarily, perhaps giving up the country club membership or the lease on his Tesla, just until his company recovered. "Maybe we could even look at a smaller place," I'd said, trying to be supportive. "Just for a year or two while you rebuild." The look that crossed his face was unlike anything I'd ever seen. Pure, undiluted rage mixed with something darker. "A smaller place? Are you completely delusional? This is what I get for marrying someone with zero business sense, someone who caves at the first sign of real challenge." His voice had escalated, with each word, spittle flying as his face turned scarlet. I'd tried to explain that I wasn't giving up. I was being practical, offering solutions, but Marcus was beyond listening. Years of resentment came pouring out like poison from an infected wound. How my career as a freelance environmental consultant was just playing around with tree-hugger nonsense. How I'd never truly contributed to our upscale lifestyle in any meaningful way. How his colleagues had been right about me from the beginning. That I was dead weight dragging down his potential. When I finally found the courage to suggest that perhaps we needed some professional help, maybe couples therapy, something inside him completely snapped. The antique vase his mother had given us for our wedding anniversary flew across the room, shattering against the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked Elliott Bay. Then came our framed photo from our honeymoon in Santorini, the glass exploding across the imported Italian tile. "If you're so eager to downsize your life, then get out and start practicing," he had screamed, storming into our bedroom. He returned minutes later with my old college duffel bag, stuffed haphazardly with whatever clothes he could grab from my side of the walk-in closet. Before I could fully process what was happening, he was physically pushing me toward the front door, my belongings trailing behind me like breadcrumbs. "Don't think about coming back until you've learned to appreciate what you had," he'd shouted as the door slammed, the sound reverberating through the hallway like a gunshot. Now, sitting in my car with the heater running and my hands still shaking, I scrolled through my contact list with growing desperation. Who could I possibly call? My best friend Emma was traveling for work in London. My younger brother Jake lived in a cramped studio apartment in Portland with barely enough room for himself. My parents had moved to their retirement community in Arizona 3 years ago, and the thought of explaining this catastrophic failure felt impossible. I had always been the stable one, the one with the beautiful marriage and the stunning apartment, the one others came to for advice when their own relationships hit rough patches. How could I possibly admit that my picture-perfect life had been nothing more than an elaborate facade, crumbling the moment real pressure was applied? I started the engine and began driving aimlessly through the snowy Seattle streets. Windshield, wipers fighting against the increasingly heavy snowfall. Without conscious direction, I found myself pulling into the parking lot of the Emerald City Inn, a modest but clean hotel in the Capitol Hill district. It wasn't the Four Seasons where Marcus and I usually stayed when traveling, but it was warm, anonymous, and most importantly, it was mine. The young man at the reception desk barely glanced up as I checked in, for which I was profoundly grateful. I didn't want to explain my snow-soaked appearance or the mascara streaks I could feel frozen on my cheeks. I just wanted a hot shower, a moment to breathe, and time to process the earth-shattering reality of what my life had just become. It took a lot of care and time to prepare and narrate this for you, so if you're enjoying it, a quick subscribe really helps and means the world to us. All right, let's get back to it. Room 412 was small, but immaculately clean, with cream-colored walls and a view of the Space Needle twinkling through the falling snow. I dropped my duffel bag by the door and sank onto the edge of the bed, finally allowing myself to feel the full magnitude of what had just occurred. My marriage was over. 9 years of what I thought was love had disintegrated in the span of 20 minutes, leaving me sitting alone in a hotel room, questioning everything I thought I knew about my life. But as I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the certified letter that had arrived that morning, the crushing weight of despair began to shift into something else entirely. Something that felt almost like destiny. Dr. Helena Vasquez had been more than just my graduate advisor at the University of Washington. She had been my mentor, my inspiration, and the closest thing to a mother figure I'd known since losing my own parents in a car accident when I was 22. Helena was a brilliant environmental scientist who had pioneered revolutionary research in sustainable energy storage systems. Her work was decades ahead of its time, but the academic world had been too conservative, too male-dominated to fully appreciate her genius. 15 years ago, Helena had shocked everyone by abruptly leaving her tenured position at the university. The official story was early retirement, but I knew better. She had grown tired of fighting for funding, tired of watching lesser minds get credit for ideas she had developed, tired of being dismissed by colleagues who saw her as an eccentric outsider rather than the visionary she truly was. "Isabella," she had told me during our last conversation 5 years ago, "sometimes you have to leave the system to truly change it. The real breakthroughs happen when you're free to think without committees and bureaucrats breathing down your neck." At the time, I thought she was just bitter about leaving academia. I had no idea she was about to transform the entire renewable energy industry. While Marcus had been building his consulting empire, dismissing Helena as irrelevant whenever I mentioned staying in touch with her. My former mentor had been quietly revolutionizing battery technology from her private laboratory in the San Juan Islands. She had developed a breakthrough in lithium-ion storage that increased efficiency by 340% while reducing manufacturing costs by half. 3 major automotive companies and 2 government agencies had been secretly bidding for exclusive licensing rights to her patents. Helena had never married, never had children of her own. "My research is my legacy," she used to say. But apparently, she had also considered me part of that legacy. According to the letter from her attorney, Helena had been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer 8 months ago. She had fought it with the same fierce determination she brought to everything else. But the battle had ultimately claimed her just 3 weeks ago. I had been the only former student who had visited her during her final months. Not because I expected anything in return. I didn't even know she had accumulated such wealth, but because she had shaped who I became as both a scientist and a person. While her former colleagues were busy with their academic politics and Marcus was consumed with his failing business, I had taken the ferry to Friday Harbor every other weekend, bringing her groceries, listening to her stories, and simply being present for someone who had given me so much. "Never let anyone convince you that your ideas are too big, Isabella," she had told me during one of our last conversations, her voice weak, but her eyes still blazing with intelligence. "I spent too many years making myself smaller to fit into other people's expectations. Don't make my mistake. When your moment comes, be bold enough to seize it." The inheritance wasn't just money. It was validation, freedom, and most importantly, it was opportunity. Along with the liquid assets, Helena had left me her private laboratory, complete with all her research, prototypes, and most crucially, the patents that were about to reshape the energy storage industry. The attorney's letter mentioned that Tesla and Ford were both preparing offers in excess of $50 million for exclusive licensing rights to her battery technology. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "I hope you've learned your lesson. When you're ready to apologize and be reasonable, you can come home. But this dramatic tantrum needs to stop." I stared at the message, my finger hovering over the reply button. The old Isabella would have responded immediately, apologizing suggesting we downsize, promising to be more supportive, grateful for the chance to return to our penthouse prison, but sitting in that hotel room, holding the key to a future Marcus couldn't even imagine. I realized I wasn't that person anymore. Helena's final gift wasn't just financial security. It was the courage to finally see my marriage for what it really was. Marcus hadn't fallen in love with me. He had fallen in love with the idea of a supportive, unambitious wife who would make him feel important while never threatening his ego with her own success. For 9 years I had played that role perfectly, dimming my own light to make his shine brighter. I turned off my phone without responding and walked to the bathroom mirror. Despite the smeared makeup and disheveled hair, I saw something I hadn't noticed in years, a spark of determination, of possibility. Marcus had thrown me out believing I had nowhere to go, no resources of my own, no choice but to come crawling back on his terms. He had no idea that Helena had spent her final months transferring patents worth a fortune into my name. He had no idea that the eccentric old bat he had mocked for years had become one of the most sought-after innovators in the renewable energy sector. He had no idea that his greatest act of cruelty had actually set me free to claim a destiny far greater than anything our marriage could have offered. As I stepped into the hot shower, letting the water wash away the trauma of the evening, I made a decision that would change everything. Marcus had wanted me gone, had literally thrown me out into the snow because he saw me as dead weight, holding back his ambitions. Tomorrow, I would start the process of showing him exactly how wrong he had been. But tonight, for the first time in 9 years, I was going to sleep as myself. Not as Marcus's wife, not as someone's supporting character, but as Isabella Chen, heir to a scientific legacy that would change the world. Marcus thought he had punished me by taking away his version of our life together. He had no idea he had actually given me the freedom to build something infinitely better. I woke the next morning to the muffled sounds of Seattle traffic and the distant hum of the hotel's heating system. For a brief, disorienting moment, I forgot where I was, reaching automatically for the familiar warmth of Marcus beside me. Instead, my hand met empty space and scratchy hotel sheets, bringing the previous night's events crashing back with brutal clarity. My phone showed 6 missed calls from Marcus, and a string of increasingly desperate messages that followed a pattern I now recognized all too well, the cycle that had defined our relationship for years, though I had been too close to see it clearly until now. Isabella, this is ridiculous. Come home immediately, and we can pretend this never happened, read the first message, sent at 11:47 p.m. Classic Marcus, attempting to minimize and dismiss my feelings while positioning himself as the reasonable party willing to forgive my overreaction. I spoke with Dr. Hammond about your behavior. He thinks you might be having some kind of stress-induced breakdown. Professional help might be necessary if this continues, came the 2:14 a.m. text. Dr. Hammond, Marcus's golf buddy who happened to be a psychiatrist, always ready to provide convenient diagnoses that supported Marcus's narrative whenever I showed signs of independence. The final message, sent just an hour ago, revealed the escalation I should have expected. I've contacted your brother Jake. He's extremely concerned about your mental state. If you don't respond by noon today, I'll have no choice but to take protective action for your own well-being. My hands trembled as I read that last message. This wasn't grief or concern. This was manipulation disguised as care, a threat wrapped in the language of love. The same pattern that had repeated itself countless times throughout our marriage, though never quite this blatantly. I forced myself to think back to the beginning, to really examine our relationship with the clarity that distance and shock had provided. Marcus and I had met 7 years ago at a green technology conference in Portland. I was there presenting my research on urban sustainability initiatives, and he was representing his then-small consulting firm's environmental division. He had seemed genuinely interested in my work, asking thoughtful questions about renewable energy implementation in urban planning. "You have such innovative ideas," he had said over dinner that first night. "Most people in this field think so small, but you see the bigger picture." For someone who had spent years having her research dismissed by male colleagues as too idealistic or not commercially viable, Marcus's validation had been intoxicating. Our courtship had been a whirlwind of weekend trips to Vancouver, expensive dinners at restaurants I couldn't afford, and constant praise for my intellect and ambition. "You're going to change the world," he would tell me, and I believed him. More importantly, I believed he would support me in doing it. We married after 18 months of dating, in a lavish ceremony at the Fairmont Olympic Hotel that his parents insisted on paying for. "Only the best for our brilliant daughter-in-law," his mother had said, though I caught the subtle emphasis on daughter-in-law rather than scientist or researcher. The changes started subtly after the honeymoon. Marcus began questioning my travel schedule for conferences and research trips. "Do you really need to be gone so much?" he would ask. "These academic events don't seem to be advancing your career in any meaningful way." When I explained that networking and research collaboration were essential parts of my field, he would nod thoughtfully and then suggest alternatives that somehow always kept me closer to home. Within 6 months of marriage, Marcus had convinced me to turn down a 6-month research fellowship in Costa Rica studying reforestation techniques. "Think about it practically," he had argued. 6 months apart during our first year of marriage? And for what? To study trees in a developing country? You could accomplish the same research right here in Washington state. I had rationalized his concerns as newlywed attachment, even found it flattering that he wanted me near. Now I recognized it as the first step in a systematic campaign to limit my independence and professional growth. The pattern became clearer as his consulting business grew more successful. Marcus began framing my research as a hobby when speaking to his colleagues and clients. "Isabella dabbles in environmental science," he would say at networking events, as if my PhD and published research were cute pastimes rather than serious scientific work. He started pressuring me to take on more commercial consulting projects that aligned with his firm's interests. "Think of the synergy," he would say. "We could be a power couple in the green tech space." What he really meant was that my scientific credibility could be leveraged to legitimize his business expansion into environmental consulting, while my own research took a backseat to projects that generated immediate revenue. The control extended to our finances in ways I hadn't fully recognized at the time. Marcus insisted on managing all our investments and major purchases, claiming he had better business sense. "You're brilliant with science, but money management isn't your strength," he would say whenever I questioned a decision. My consulting income was automatically deposited into our joint account, which Marcus monitored and controlled. When I received my first major research grant 3 years ago, $200,000 to study urban carbon sequestration methods, Marcus had initially celebrated. But within weeks he was suggesting ways to optimize the funding by routing equipment purchases through his business contacts, essentially ensuring that a significant portion of my grant money flowed through his network. The gaslighting intensified whenever I expressed frustration with these arrangements. If I complained about feeling professionally stifled, Marcus would remind me of all the opportunities his connections had provided. If I suggested we needed better work-life balance, he would point out how much he sacrificed for our success. If I questioned his financial decisions, I was being ungrateful or paranoid. The pattern reached its peak during his business crisis. As Apex Digital Solutions began hemorrhaging clients after the data breach, Marcus's control tactics became more desperate and obvious. He started monitoring my email under the guise of helping with administrative tasks. He began questioning every professional meeting or lunch, asking detailed questions about who I was meeting and why. Most tellingly, he had actively discouraged my continued relationship with Helena, despite knowing how important she was to my professional development. "That woman fills your head with unrealistic ideas about academic achievement," he had said just 6 months ago. "She never had to balance career with marriage like you do. Her advice isn't relevant to your situation." Now I understood the real reason Marcus had wanted to distance me from Helena. She represented everything he feared. A brilliant woman who had refused to compromise her vision for anyone else's comfort, who had walked away from a system that diminished her to build something extraordinary on her own terms. Helena had seen through Marcus from the beginning, though she had been too diplomatic to say so directly. "Be careful not to let anyone else's limitations become your own," she had warned me during one of our last conversations before her illness. "Sometimes the people closest to us are the ones most threatened by our potential." As I sat in that hotel room, surrounded by the debris of my former life, I finally saw the complete picture. Marcus hadn't married me in spite of my ambition. He had married me because of it, believing he could harness and control my potential for his own benefit. When I became too successful or independent, he found ways to rein me in. When I became too compliant, he criticized my lack of drive. It was a no-win situation designed to keep me perpetually off balance, always striving for his approval while never quite achieving the independence that would threaten his position as the dominant partner in our relationship. The cruelest irony was that while Marcus had been systematically undermining my professional confidence, Helena had been building a legacy that would ultimately set me free. While he was dismissing her as irrelevant, she was creating patents that would make me independently wealthy beyond his wildest dreams. I turned off my phone without responding to any of his messages and ordered room service for the first time in years without calculating whether Marcus would approve of the expense. Today, I would begin the process of reclaiming not just my freedom, but my identity. By 10 a.m., I had made my first decision as a truly independent woman in nearly a decade. I was going to see Helena's laboratory. The attorney's letter had included detailed instructions for accessing the property, along with security codes and keys that Helena had specifically requested be given to me personally. According to the documentation, the San Juan Islands facility was not just a laboratory. It was a fully equipped residence where Helena had spent her final years perfecting the technology that would now change my life. I checked out of the Emerald City Inn and drove north toward Anacortes, where the ferry would take me to Friday Harbor. The 3-hour journey gave me time to process the magnitude of what I was inheriting, but more importantly, it gave me space to breathe freely for the first time in years. No one knew where I was going. No one was tracking my movements or questioning my decisions. The simple act of choosing my own destination felt revolutionary. The Washington State Ferry cut through choppy winter waters, and I stood on the upper deck despite the cold, watching Seattle's skyline shrink behind me. Other passengers stayed inside the warm cabin, but I needed the bite of salt air and the endless expanse of gray-blue water to help me internalize that I was actually doing this, leaving behind everything familiar to step into an unknown future. My key. Phone buzzed repeatedly with calls from Marcus, but I had turned off notifications. Whatever crisis he was manufacturing would have to wait. For the first time in our relationship, his emergencies were not my responsibility. Friday Harbor looked like a postcard even in winter, with its quaint downtown and marina filled with boats covered in protective tarps. I picked up the keys from Helena's attorney's local office, a small practice housed in a converted Victorian home near the harbor. The receptionist, Mrs. Patterson, had clearly been expecting me. "Dr. Vasquez spoke of you often," she said warmly, handing me an envelope along with the keys. "She was so proud of your environmental work. She said you were the daughter she never had." The words brought unexpected tears to my eyes. Helena had never told me she felt that way, though her actions over the years now made perfect sense. The drive to Helena's property took me along winding coastal roads lined with towering Douglas firs and madrone trees. The GPS led me down an unmarked gravel road that opened onto a clearing overlooking Harrow Strait, where a stunning modern structure seemed to grow organically from the landscape. The building was nothing like I had expected. Instead of a sterile laboratory, Helena had created a workspace that blended seamlessly with its natural surroundings, featuring floor-to-ceiling windows, sustainable materials, and solar panels that were obviously her own advanced design. I stood at the front door for a long moment, key in hand, understanding that crossing this threshold would mark the point of no return. Behind me lay the wreckage of my marriage, and the careful compromises that had defined my adult life. Ahead lay uncertainty, but also possibility on a scale I had never dared to imagine. The interior took my breath away. The main level combined living space with work areas in an open concept that felt both sophisticated and welcoming. Helena's furniture was minimal but exquisite, pieces that had clearly been chosen for both beauty and function. The kitchen featured commercial-grade equipment alongside a cozy breakfast nook overlooking the water. But it was the laboratory space that truly amazed me. Helena had created a research facility that would be the envy of any major university or corporation. State-of-the-art equipment lined the walls, and multiple workstations were set up for different aspects of her battery research. Digital displays showed energy readings from various prototypes, and a secure storage area contained what appeared to be enough rare earth materials to continue her work for years. On the main desk, I found a handwritten note with my name on it, along with detailed instructions for accessing Helena's research files and ongoing projects. Her handwriting was as precise as I remembered, though slightly shakier than in years past. "Isabella," the note began, "if you're reading this, then my time has ended and yours is about to begin. I have spent the last 15 years developing technology that will revolutionize energy storage, But I was never interested in building a business empire. I was interested in changing the world. You have the vision and the integrity to ensure this technology serves humanity rather than enriching shareholders at the expense of environmental progress. She had outlined specific projects that were closest to completion, including the battery technology that automotive companies were bidding for, but also more experimental work on grid-scale energy storage that could transform how cities managed. Renewable power. The patents are valuable, she wrote, but they are only the beginning. The real opportunity is in understanding that this technology can reshape not just the energy industry, but our entire relationship with the environment. As I explored the facility, I discovered that Helena had been far more successful than even the attorney's letter had indicated. In addition to the patents everyone knew about, she had developed proprietary manufacturing processes that could reduce production costs even further. Her private laboratory contained prototypes that were months ahead of anything currently available commercially. Most remarkably, she had designed the entire operation to be completely sustainable. The laboratory was powered entirely by her own solar panel designs, with battery storage that kept the facility running even during the frequent Pacific Northwest power outages. She had created a working model of the future she envisioned, a world where advanced technology existed in harmony with natural systems rather than in opposition to them. But it was the personal touches that moved me most deeply. In the master bedroom, Helena had created a reading nook with built-in bookshelves containing all my published research papers, carefully organized and annotated with her handwritten notes. She had been following my career more closely than I had realized, documenting my progress and apparently planning for this moment long before her illness forced the timeline. I found a fully equipped studio space where Helena had been working on technical illustrations to explain her innovations to non-scientists. Her drawings showed the same attention to detail that had made her research so groundbreaking, but with an artistic sensibility I had never known she possessed. On her desk were sketches for what appeared to be a book, a comprehensive guide to sustainable energy technology written for general audiences. As evening approached, I prepared dinner in Helena's kitchen using supplies she had obviously stocked for my arrival. The refrigerator contained all my favorite foods, and the pantry held organic ingredients that reflected both her health consciousness and her knowledge of my dietary preferences. Even in death, she was taking care of me in ways Marcus never had during our entire marriage. I sat on the deck overlooking Harrow Strait, wrapped in one of Helena's wool blankets, watching the lights of Victoria, British Columbia twinkle across the water. My phone had been silent for hours. I had finally turned it off completely, understanding that whatever crisis Marcus was manufacturing could wait until I was ready to deal with it. For the first time in years, I felt completely at peace. Not just because of the financial security Helena had provided, but because I was finally in a space where my work, my values, and my vision for the future were not only accepted, but celebrated. Helena had created more than a laboratory. She had built a sanctuary where innovation could flourish without compromise. As I prepared for bed in Helena's guest room, I made a decision that would have seemed impossible just 24 hours earlier. I wasn't going back to Seattle to fight for my marriage or to reclaim my place in a life that had never truly been mine. Instead, I was going to stay here and learn everything Helena had created. I was going to honor her legacy by becoming the scientist and innovator she had always believed I could be. Tomorrow, I would begin the real work of transformation, not just of my life, but of an entire industry that was ready for the revolution. Helena had died perfecting. I woke on my second morning at Helena's laboratory to the sound of seagulls and the gentle rhythm of waves against the shoreline below. For the first time in years, I had slept through the night without anxiety, without the constant low-level stress that had become my normal state during the final months of my marriage. But as I reached for my phone to check the time, reality crashed back in with brutal force. 17 missed calls from Marcus, 12 from my brother Jake, and 3 from numbers I didn't recognize. The voicemails painted a picture of escalating desperation and manipulation that made my stomach clench with familiar dread. Isabella, I've reported you as missing to the Seattle Police Department. Marcus's voice was tight with barely controlled fury in the most recent message. Your behavior is becoming increasingly erratic and concerning. I've spoken with Dr. Hammond, and we both agree you need immediate professional intervention. I'm flying to Arizona today to speak with your parents about getting you the help you obviously need. The threat was clear and terrifying. Marcus was attempting to create a narrative of mental instability that could potentially affect my legal rights, my professional reputation, and my access to Helena's inheritance. I immediately called the law firm that had handled Helena's estate, my hands shaking as I explained the situation to the receptionist. Within an hour, I was connected with Patricia Morrison, the senior partner who had personally overseen Helena's legal affairs. Patricia's voice was calm but serious as she listened to my account of the past 2 days. Dr. Chen, Dr. Vasquez specifically anticipated this type of situation, Patricia said, her tone reassuring. She was very concerned about protecting your inheritance from any potential interference. We have extensive documentation of her wishes and your legal rights. However, given your husband's threats, I think we need to take immediate protective action. Patricia explained that Helena had instructed her to provide comprehensive legal support if I ever needed protection from family members or spouses who might challenge the inheritance. She was very specific about ensuring your independence, Patricia said. She mentioned that you might face pressure from people who underestimated your strength and tried to control your decisions. By noon, Patricia had connected me with David Kim, a family law attorney who specialized in high-asset divorces involving emotional abuse and coercive control. David's practice was based in Seattle, but he immediately agreed to meet me on San Juan Island the following day. Time is critical here, David explained during our phone call. Your husband is trying to establish a pattern of instability that could affect property division and your inheritance rights. We need to document everything and file protective measures immediately. While I waited for legal reinforcement, I reached out to my professional network, starting with Dr. Sarah Chen, no relation despite the shared surname, my former colleague at the University of Washington's Environmental Science Department. Sarah had been one of the few academics who had consistently supported my research and understood the political challenges women faced in our field. Isabella, my God, I've been worried sick, Sarah said when she answered my call. Marcus called the department yesterday claiming you were having some kind of breakdown and asking if we'd noticed any concerning behavior. Professor Reynolds told him it was inappropriate to discuss your mental health with a third party, but several people have been asking questions. The revelation that Marcus was systematically contacting my professional contacts made my blood run cold. This wasn't just personal manipulation. He was actively trying to damage my scientific reputation and credibility. Sarah immediately offered to provide character references and professional testimonials if needed. Everyone here knows you're one of the most brilliant and stable researchers in the department, she assured me. Marcus's claims are completely inconsistent with your professional behavior and achievements. Next, I called Dr. James Wellington, the renewable energy engineer who had collaborated with me on several projects and had occasionally worked with Helena in her later years. James was one of the few people who understood the significance of Helena's research and could verify both her scientific achievements and my legitimate connection to her work. Isabella? This is incredible news about Helena's legacy, James said after I explained the situation. But I'm not surprised she chose you. She mentioned several times over the years that you were the only young scientist she knew who truly understood the bigger picture of sustainable technology. James revealed something that stunned me. Helena had been quietly consulting with him about the commercial potential of her patents for the past 2 years. She wanted to make sure the technology would be developed responsibly, he explained. She was specifically worried about licensing deals that would prioritize profit over environmental impact. She said she needed someone with both scientific credibility and ethical integrity to shepherd the technology. James offered to serve as a technical consultant to help me understand the full scope of Helena's innovations and their market potential. He also provided contact information for Dr. Lisa Rodriguez, a patent attorney who specialized in clean technology and had worked with Helena on some of her applications. Dr. Rodriguez agreed to an emergency consultation that afternoon via video call. Her expertise proved invaluable as she walked me through the legal protections surrounding my inheritance and the commercial opportunities ahead. Dr. Vasquez was exceptionally thorough in protecting these assets, Dr. Rodriguez explained. The patents are held in a trust with you as the sole beneficiary, specifically designed to prevent interference from spouses or family members. Even if your husband attempts to claim marital property rights, these particular assets are completely protected. She also revealed that Tesla and Ford weren't the only companies interested in Helena's technology. Apple and Samsung have both submitted preliminary inquiries about licensing the battery innovations for consumer electronics, Dr. Rodriguez said. The total licensing potential could exceed $200 million over the next 5 years. As the day progressed, my support network continued to expand. Emma, my best friend who was still traveling in London, immediately offered to cut her trip short and return to help. My younger brother Jake, despite Marcus's attempts to manipulate him, called to express his support once he heard my version of events. Marcus painted a completely different picture, Jake admitted. But I know you, Izzy. You're the most level-headed person I know. If you left him, you had good reasons. What do you need from me? Jake's support was particularly meaningful because he worked in tech security and understood both the legal and practical aspects of protecting digital assets and communications. He immediately began helping me secure my online accounts and digital communications from Marcus's potential interference. Most surprisingly, my former research assistant, Michael Torres, reached out after hearing about Helena's passing through academic channels. Michael had worked with me on urban sustainability projects and had always expressed interest in renewable energy applications. Dr. Chen, I know this might seem presumptuous, but if you're continuing Dr. Vasquez's work, I'd love to be involved, Michael said. I've been working in corporate consulting since graduation, but what you and Dr. Vasquez were doing is the kind of research that actually matters. By evening, I had assembled a team of professional allies who not only supported my personal situation, but could help me navigate the scientific and commercial opportunities ahead. Patricia Morrison and David Kim would handle the legal protection, Dr. Rodriguez would manage patent and licensing issues, James Wellington would provide technical consultation, and Michael Torres could assist with ongoing research and development. As I sat in Helena's living room that night, reviewing the contact information and commitments from my new support network, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. The confidence that comes from being surrounded by people who believe in your capabilities rather than trying to diminish them. Marcus had spent years isolating me from colleagues and mentors who might encourage my independence. But Helena's legacy had connected me with a community of scientists, attorneys, and innovators who saw my potential and wanted to help me realize it. For the first time since leaving Seattle, I turned my phone back on and composed a brief text to Marcus. I am safe and making decisions about my future. Please respect my need for space and stop contacting my colleagues and family members. Then I blocked his number, understanding that engaging with his manipulation would only give him more ammunition for his campaign to undermine my credibility. Tomorrow, when David Kim arrived for our legal strategy session, I would begin the formal process of protecting not just my inheritance, but my right to build the future Helena had envisioned for both of us. David Kim arrived at Friday Harbor the next morning, looking like he had stepped out of a legal thriller. Sharp suit, confident, demeanor, and a briefcase full of documents that would change everything. We met at Helena's laboratory, where the panoramic windows and cutting-edge technology provided a striking backdrop for what would become the most important legal strategy session of my life. Your husband is escalating faster than I expected, David said without preamble, spreading papers across Helena's conference table. He filed for temporary conservatorship yesterday evening, claiming you're mentally incompetent due to grief and stress. He's requesting immediate control over all your assets, including any recent inheritances. My stomach dropped. I had underestimated Marcus's willingness to use the legal system as a weapon. Can he actually do that? I asked, my voice barely steady. He can try, David replied, his tone grim but determined. But he's made several critical mistakes that will work in our favor. First, he filed without proper medical documentation. Dr. Hammond's golf course opinion won't hold up in court. Second, he's claiming financial incompetence while you're demonstrating remarkable business acumen by assembling a professional team and making strategic decisions about valuable assets. David had already begun building our counter-strategy. He had obtained statements from Dr. Isabella Chen and 3 other University of Washington colleagues attesting to my professional competence and stable behavior. He had also secured testimony from Mrs. Patterson, Helena's local contact, confirming that I had been visiting Helena regularly and managing complex travel arrangements independently. Most importantly, David continued, Patricia Morrison has provided documentation showing that Dr. Vasquez specifically anticipated this situation and took extensive legal precautions. Her trust documents include explicit language protecting you from family interference and include a psychological evaluation she commissioned to verify your mental competence at the time of inheritance. I stared at him in amazement. Helena had me psychologically evaluated? Not exactly, David smiled. She had you observed by a forensic psychologist during your visits over the past 6 months. Dr. Rachel Stevens was posing as a caregiver, but she's actually a court-certified expert in competency evaluations. Her report describes you as emotionally stable, intellectually sharp, and demonstrating exceptional judgment under stress. Helena's foresight continued to astound me. Even while battling cancer, she had been protecting me from threats I hadn't even recognized. But Marcus wasn't finished. David's phone rang during our meeting, and his expression darkened as he listened to whoever was calling. That was my office, he said after hanging up. Your husband has hired Morrison, Blake & Associates, the most aggressive litigation firm in Seattle. They specialize in contested divorces involving high-net-worth individuals. Douglas Blake himself is taking the case, which means Marcus is prepared to spend serious money on this fight. Douglas Blake's reputation preceded him. He was known for scorched earth tactics, character assassination, and turning divorce proceedings into psychological warfare. If Marcus had hired Blake, he was no longer trying to reconcile. He was trying to destroy me. The situation deteriorated further when Dr. James Wellington called with disturbing news. Isabella, I just received a very strange call from someone claiming to be conducting a background check on your mental health and professional competence, James said via speakerphone. They were asking detailed questions about your work with Helena, your decision-making abilities, and whether I'd noticed any erratic behavior. David's jaw tightened. Private investigators. Blake's standard operating procedure. They're trying to build a case that you're unstable and potentially being manipulated by your professional advisors. Within hours, similar calls had reached Dr. Rodriguez, Michael Torres, and even Emma in London. Marcus and his legal team were conducting a systematic campaign to undermine my credibility by questioning everyone in my professional and personal network. But their most aggressive move came that afternoon. Patricia Morrison called with urgent news that made my blood run cold. Isabella, someone broke into Dr. Vasquez's storage facility in Seattle last night, Patricia said, her voice tight with anger. The security company said it was a professional job. No damage to the building, but Helena's personal files and research notes were specifically targeted. Nothing else was touched. The implications were staggering. Marcus somehow knew about Helena's Seattle storage facility and had arranged for its contents to be stolen. The research notes and personal files could contain information he could use to challenge my inheritance or my mental state. How could he possibly know about the storage facility? I asked David. Someone talked, David replied grimly. Either your husband has access to Helena's legal communications somehow, or someone in your professional network isn't as trustworthy as we thought. The paranoia was almost overwhelming. After years of Marcus's gaslighting, the idea that I couldn't trust my own judgment about people felt terrifyingly familiar, but David helped me focus on practical responses rather than emotional reactions. We need to assume all your communications are compromised, he said. From now on, we use secure channels only. I'm also recommending we hire our own security firm to protect both you and this facility. As if summoned by his words, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Enjoying your little vacation? It won't last much longer. Some people need to learn they can't just abandon their responsibilities and expect no consequences. David immediately contacted the local sheriff's department to report the threatening message, while I realized that Marcus's campaign was no longer limited to legal and financial warfare. He was actively trying to intimidate me into compliance. The sheriff's deputy who responded, Officer Maria Santos, took the threat seriously and recommended additional security measures for Helena's property. We've had a few incidents lately of people asking questions about this property, she said. Nothing actionable, but locals noticed strangers taking photos and asking about the owner. Marcus was conducting surveillance on Helena's laboratory, trying to gather information he could use against me. The sanctuary that had provided such peace was now feeling like a fortress under siege. That evening, as David finalized our legal counter-strategy, Dr. Rodriguez called with news that initially seemed positive, but quickly revealed another layer of Marcus's desperation. Isabella, I received a call today from someone claiming to represent you, attempting to negotiate licensing deals for Helena's patents, Dr. Rodriguez said. They had detailed information about the technology and claimed you had authorized them to explore commercial opportunities. I never authorized anyone to do that, I said, my confusion evident. I know. That's why I called. Someone is impersonating your business interests, possibly trying to create contracts you'd be legally bound to honor. It's a sophisticated fraud scheme, probably designed to complicate your control over the patents. David shook his head in disgust. Blake's playbook: create as much legal chaos as possible, force you to fight on multiple fronts simultaneously, drain your resources and emotional energy until you're willing to settle for anything just to make it stop. As we reviewed the day's developments, I felt the walls closing in. Marcus wasn't just fighting for half my inheritance. He was trying to systematically destroy my ability to function independently. Every professional relationship, every business opportunity, every source of support was being poisoned by his campaign of manipulation and lies. But sitting in Helena's laboratory, surrounded by the evidence of what one brilliant woman could accomplish when free from controlling influences, I found my resolve hardening rather than weakening. What do we do next? I asked David. His smile was predatory. We stop playing defense and start fighting back. Blake's tactics work against people who are actually vulnerable and isolated. But you have resources he doesn't know about, allies he can't touch, and legal protections he hasn't anticipated. Tomorrow we show Marcus what happens when he picks a fight with someone who's finally ready to win. The emergency hearing was scheduled for Thursday morning at the King County Superior Court in Seattle. David had managed to expedite our response to Marcus's conservatorship petition, and Judge Catherine Williams was known for her no-nonsense approach to cases involving alleged mental incompetence and financial abuse. I stood in front of Helena's bedroom mirror that morning, choosing my outfit with the same strategic precision Helena had once applied to her research. The navy blue suit conveyed professionalism and stability, while the silver necklace, a gift from Helena years ago featuring a small compass pendant, served as a reminder of who I was fighting for. David met me at the courthouse steps at 8:30 a.m., along with Dr. Rachel Stevens, whose presence as Helena's secret psychological evaluator would be our surprise weapon. Patricia Morrison had flown up from the San Juan Islands with a briefcase full of documentation that would demolish Marcus's claims about my mental state. Remember, David coached as we walked through the courthouse corridors, Marcus will try to provoke an emotional reaction. Blake's strategy depends on making you appear unstable. Stay calm, answer only what's asked, and trust the evidence. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, but Marcus had certainly brought reinforcements. Douglas Blake sat at the plaintiff's table with 2 associates, all expensive suits and predatory confidence. Marcus himself looked haggard, unshaven, rumpled shirt, the desperate appearance of a man whose carefully constructed world was collapsing around him. But it was the woman sitting in the gallery behind Marcus that made my blood freeze. Dr. Amanda Hammond, the psychiatrist Marcus had been consulting, was there to provide expert testimony about my alleged mental breakdown. She had never met me, never conducted any evaluation, but she was prepared to support Marcus's narrative based entirely on his second-hand accounts. Judge Williams called the hearing to order, and Blake immediately launched into his opening statement with theatrical flair. Your Honor, we are here today because a vulnerable woman, overcome by grief and clearly suffering from severe emotional disturbance, has been isolated and manipulated by unscrupulous individuals seeking to exploit her substantial inheritance. Blake painted a picture of me as a fragile widow. He conveniently ignored that I was very much alive and Marcus was my estranged husband, who had fallen under the influence of so-called advisors who were encouraging my delusional behavior for their own financial gain. Mrs. Chen has abandoned her home, her marriage, and her responsibilities, Blake continued, in pursuit of fantasies about becoming some kind of environmental entrepreneur. Her husband's attempts to provide support and guidance have been met with increasingly erratic and concerning responses. When it was David's turn, his approach was methodical and devastating. Your Honor, what Mr. Blake describes as mental incompetence, the evidence will show is actually a brilliant scientist making informed decisions about valuable assets with the guidance of qualified professionals. David's opening statement systematically dismantled Marcus's narrative. He outlined my educational credentials, my professional achievements, my ongoing research projects, and the substantial inheritance I had legitimately received from a mentor who had specifically chosen me for my scientific competence and personal integrity. Dr. Chen is not being manipulated, David concluded. She is being harassed by a husband who cannot accept that his wife has resources and opportunities beyond his control. The first witness Blake called was Marcus himself, and watching him testify was like seeing a masterclass in manipulation. He spoke in carefully modulated tones about his deep concern for my well-being, describing incidents that were technically true but completely distorted in context. Isabella has always been sensitive, Marcus said, dabbing at his eyes with a tissue. The stress of Dr. Vasquez's death, combined with the sudden responsibility of this inheritance, has clearly overwhelmed her fragile emotional state. She's making impulsive decisions that would have horrified her just months ago. Blake guided Marcus through a recitation of my concerning behaviors, leaving Seattle without explanation, refusing to answer phone calls, consulting with lawyers, instead of family, making major financial decisions without spousal input. Each action sounded reasonable in isolation, but was presented as evidence of psychological deterioration. I'm not trying to control Isabella, Marcus said, his voice breaking, convincingly. I'm trying to save her from people who are taking advantage of her vulnerability for their own purposes. David's cross-examination was surgical. He began with simple questions about Marcus's own financial situation, forcing him to admit that his consulting business was failing and that he was facing personal bankruptcy. Then David moved to Marcus's behavior on the night he threw me out. Mr. Chen, you testified that you were concerned about your wife's emotional state, David said calmly. Is throwing someone's belongings onto the street during a snowstorm consistent with that concern? Marcus's composure cracked slightly. I was frustrated, I made a mistake in the heat of the moment. A mistake that involved physically ejecting your allegedly mentally ill wife from her home during inclement weather? I wasn't thinking clearly. But you want this court to believe that you're thinking clearly enough now to make decisions about Dr. Chen's mental health and financial affairs? Blake objected, but the damage was done. Marcus's credibility was visibly eroding with each question. Dr. Hammond's testimony was even more problematic for their case. Under David's questioning, she admitted that she had never personally evaluated me, had never reviewed my medical records, and was basing her professional opinion entirely on Marcus's reports. Doctor, would you normally recommend conservatorship based solely on a spouse's description of concerning behavior? David asked. Well, no, but in cases where the patient refuses evaluation, Dr. Chen has refused evaluation? Do you have documentation of that refusal? Dr. Hammond faltered. Not exactly. But her failure to seek help suggests... Suggests what, doctor? That a woman who leaves an emotionally abusive situation is mentally incompetent? Blake's objection was sustained, but Dr. Hammond's credibility was destroyed. Then David called Dr. Rachel Stevens, and the courtroom atmosphere shifted completely. Dr. Stevens testified that she had observed me closely over 6 months, during which I had demonstrated exceptional emotional stability while caring for a dying mentor, managing complex travel arrangements, and maintaining professional obligations. Dr. Chen showed remarkable resilience and judgment, Dr. Stevens testified. She made difficult decisions about Dr. Vasquez's medical care with wisdom and compassion. Her behavior was entirely consistent with someone experiencing normal grief while maintaining her psychological equilibrium. Patricia Morrison followed, with testimony about Helena's meticulous planning and her specific concerns about protecting me from family interference. The trust documents were entered into evidence, showing Helena's explicit instructions that I be given complete control over the inheritance without spousal involvement. But the most powerful moment came when David called me to testify. I walked to the witness stand with steady steps, feeling Helena's compass pendant against my chest like a talisman. Under David's gentle questioning, I explained my relationship with Helena, my professional background, and the specific reasons I had left. Marcus, I spoke clearly and factually about his controlling behavior, his financial manipulation, and his escalating threats. Dr. Chen, David asked, do you believe you are mentally competent to manage your inheritance and make decisions about your future? Yes, I replied firmly. I have assembled a team of qualified professionals to advise me. I am continuing the research that Dr. Vasquez entrusted to me, and I am making decisions based on careful consideration of all available information. That's not mental illness. That's exactly what any reasonable person would do in my situation. Blake's cross-examination was aggressive, but ineffective. He tried to portray my departure from Marcus as impulsive, and my professional consultations as evidence of manipulation. But I answered each question with calm precision, backed by documentation that supported every decision I had made. When Judge Williams called for closing arguments, Blake's desperation was evident. He repeated his claims about my emotional fragility and the dangers of leaving me unsupervised with substantial assets, but his arguments sounded hollow against the weight of evidence David had presented. David's closing was devastating in its simplicity. Your Honor, the evidence shows that Dr. Chen is a competent adult, making informed decisions about her life and career. Mr. Chen's petition is not about protecting his wife. It's about controlling assets he has no legal right to. Claim. Judge Williams deliberated for less than 20 minutes. When she returned, her ruling was swift and decisive. The petition for conservatorship is denied, she announced. The court finds no evidence of mental incompetence or inability to manage financial affairs. Furthermore, this court is concerned about the tactics employed in this case, including harassment of Dr. Chen's professional associates and apparent attempts to interfere with her legitimate business activities. She turned to address Marcus directly. Mr. Chen, Any further attempts to interfere with your wife's legal rights or to harass her professional associates will result in contempt charges and possible criminal referral. As we left the courthouse, Marcus tried one final confrontation in the parking garage. "This isn't over, Isabella," he called after me. His mask of concern finally completely dropped. "You think you've won? You're nothing without me. You'll come, crawling back within 6 months, and I won't be there." I turned to face him for what I knew would be the last time. "You're right, Marcus. This isn't over. It's just beginning. And you're absolutely correct that I'm nothing like the woman you married. That woman was afraid of you. This woman isn't afraid of anything." 18 months after Marcus had thrown my belongings into a Seattle snowstorm, I stood before a packed auditorium at the International Clean Energy Summit in San Francisco, preparing to deliver the keynote address that would forever change how the world thought about sustainable battery technology. The transformation from discarded wife to industry pioneer felt surreal, but as I looked out at the audience of scientists, entrepreneurs, and government officials, I knew Helena would have been proud. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice carrying clearly through the microphone. "What I'm about to share with you represents 15 years of groundbreaking research by Dr. Helena Vasquez and 18 months of dedicated development by our team at Vasquez-Chen Sustainable Technologies. Today, we're not just announcing a new product, we're unveiling the future of clean energy storage." The presentation screen behind me displayed efficiency charts that made several audience members audibly gasp. Our next-generation lithium-ion batteries didn't just meet the performance benchmarks Helena had achieved in her laboratory, they exceeded them by an additional 40%. More importantly, we had solved the manufacturing scalability problem that had prevented widespread commercial adoption. Michael Torres, now my chief research officer, stood at the side of the stage managing the technical demonstration. The young man who had once been my research assistant had blossomed into a brilliant engineer in his own right, his enthusiasm for sustainable technology matching my own. Together, we had transformed Helena's laboratory from a private research facility into the headquarters of what Energy Weekly was calling the most promising clean tech startup of the decade. The past 18 months had been a whirlwind of discovery, development, and strategic business decisions. After the court victory that had definitively established my rights to Helena's inheritance, I had thrown myself into understanding every aspect of her research. Dr. James Wellington had been invaluable in helping me decode Helena's more complex innovations, while Dr. Lisa Rodriguez had guided us through the intricate patent licensing negotiations that were now generating substantial revenue. The licensing deals alone had exceeded our most optimistic projections. Tesla had committed to a 5-year exclusive partnership for automotive applications worth $180 million. Apple had signed for consumer electronics integration at $120 million over 3 years. But the breakthrough that truly excited me was our partnership with the Department of Energy to develop grid-scale storage systems that could revolutionize how cities managed renewable power. The applications extend far beyond individual devices or vehicles, I explained to the captivated audience. Imagine solar farms that can store enough energy to power entire cities through multiple days of cloudy weather. Imagine wind installations that can provide consistent power regardless of weather patterns. That future isn't decades away. It's here today. The applause was thunderous, but more importantly, I could see the genuine excitement in the faces before me. These were people who understood the implications of what we had achieved, who recognized that Helena's vision was finally becoming reality on a scale that could impact global climate change. After the presentation, the media interviews and investor meetings blurred together in a familiar rhythm that had become my new normal. Forbes wanted to discuss my inclusion on their 40 under 40 list. The Wall Street Journal was interested in our expansion plans. Venture capital firms were competing to participate in our Series B funding round, despite the fact that we were already profitable and didn't technically need additional investment. But the conversation that meant the most came during the summit's closing dinner, when Dr. Sarah Chen approached me with tears in her eyes. "Isabella, I have something to tell you," she said, pulling me aside from the networking reception. "2 months ago, Marcus came to the university trying to get information about your current research. He claimed he was considering reconciliation and wanted to understand your work better." My stomach tightened at the mention of Marcus, though his power to hurt me had significantly diminished. "What did you tell him?" "Nothing," Sarah smiled. "But Professor Reynolds told him something I think you should know. He said, 'Mr. Chen, your ex-wife is going to change the world. The only question is whether you'll be remembered as the man who supported her or the man who tried to stop her.'" The divorce had been finalized 8 months earlier, with Marcus ultimately receiving a settlement that was fair, but far less than what he had originally demanded. Douglas Blake's aggressive tactics had backfired spectacularly when Judge Williams referred several of his actions to the State Bar for ethical review. Marcus had been forced to accept David Kim's final offer or risk losing everything in protracted litigation he could no longer afford. I had learned through mutual acquaintances that Marcus was struggling professionally and personally. Apex Digital Solutions had closed permanently, and his reputation in the tech consulting world had been permanently damaged by the public nature of our divorce proceedings. Several former colleagues had quietly reached out to express their shock at his behavior, admitting they had never seen that side of him during their professional relationships. But tonight wasn't about Marcus or the painful past he represented. Tonight was about the future Helena had envisioned and the team we had built to make it reality. The summit's final evening event was held on a rooftop terrace overlooking San Francisco Bay, and as I mingled with fellow scientists and entrepreneurs, I felt the profound satisfaction that comes from knowing your work matters. The conversations weren't about market share or profit margins. They were about carbon reduction, sustainable development, and the genuine possibility of leaving a habitable planet for future generations. Emma had flown in from London for the summit, and she found me on the terrace as the evening was winding down. "I have to ask," she said with a mischievous grin, "do you ever miss the penthouse lifestyle? The fancy dinners, the country club membership, the image of having it all figured out?" I considered the question seriously as I looked out over the bay, where container ships moved slowly through waters that reflected the lights of one of the world's most innovative cities. "You know what I miss?" I said finally. "I miss the version of myself that thought security meant keeping someone else happy. I miss how simple life seemed when I believed that making myself smaller was the price of love." Emma laughed. "That's possibly the most diplomatic way of saying hell no I've ever heard." As the evening concluded and guests began making their way back to hotels, I received a text message that stopped me in my tracks. It was from Dr. Marina Rodriguez, the director of the Pacific Northwest Research Institute, with an offer I had been hoping for but hardly dared to expect. "Isabella, the board has approved your proposal for the Helena Vasquez Center for Sustainable Innovation. We're prepared to offer you the position of director, with a $50 million endowment for the first 5 years. The center would be housed at our new campus on Bainbridge Island, with full autonomy over research priorities and commercial partnerships. Are you interested in discussing terms?" I stared at the message, hardly believing what I was reading. The research center I had proposed would combine academic excellence with commercial viability, exactly the kind of institution Helena had always dreamed of creating. It would be a place where brilliant scientists could pursue groundbreaking research without the constraints of traditional academic politics or corporate profit pressures. Standing on that San Francisco rooftop, surrounded by the evidence of what determination and vision could accomplish, I composed my reply. "Dr. Rodriguez, I am absolutely interested. When can we meet to discuss how we can honor Dr. Vasquez's legacy while building the future she envisioned?" As I hit send, I felt Helena's presence as clearly as if she were standing beside me. The scared, diminished woman who had been thrown out into a snowstorm 18 months ago was gone forever, replaced by someone who understood that true security came not from pleasing others, but from believing in yourself and your ability to create value in the world. The Helena Vasquez Center for Sustainable Innovation would be more than a research facility. It would be proof that sometimes the worst moments of our lives are actually doorways to our greatest achievements, if we have the courage to walk through them. 2 years to the day after Marcus had slammed our penthouse door and declared, "Don't you dare come crawling back," I stood in the grand opening ceremony of the Helena Vasquez Center for Sustainable Innovation, watching as the ribbon fell away to reveal the bronze plaque bearing my mentor's name. The research facility on Bainbridge Island was everything Helena had dreamed of. A place where brilliant minds could pursue world-changing innovations without compromise or constraint. The morning Seattle Times lay folded on my desk, its headline, "Reading Local Scientists' Clean Energy Revolution Attracts Global Investment." The article detailed how Vasquez Chen Sustainable Technologies had just closed a $500 million Series C funding round, making it one of the most valuable clean tech companies in the Pacific Northwest. But more meaningful than the valuation was the reporter's observation that our technology had already prevented an estimated 2.3 million tons of carbon emissions through improved battery efficiency across multiple industries. As I prepared for the center's dedication ceremony, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. The research facility would house 47 scientists from 12 countries, all working on projects that could revolutionize how humanity interacted with energy. Our automotive partnerships had expanded to include Mercedes, BMW, and 3 Chinese manufacturers. The consumer electronics applications were being integrated into everything from smartphones to medical devices. Most importantly, our grid-scale storage systems were being deployed in 17 cities across 4 continents. The dedication ceremony drew an impressive crowd. Governor Patricia Harrison delivered remarks about Washington State's leadership in clean technology. Dr. James Wellington, now serving on our scientific advisory board, spoke eloquently about Helena's vision for sustainable innovation. Michael Torres presented our latest breakthrough, a manufacturing process that would reduce battery production costs by an additional 30% while eliminating the last toxic components from our supply chain. But the moment that brought tears to my eyes came when Mrs. Patterson from Friday Harbor approached the podium to share her memories of Helena's final years. Dr. Vasquez used to say that the best revenge against those who tried to diminish you was to become too big to ignore, Mrs. Patterson said, her voice carrying across the packed auditorium. She would be so proud to see how Dr. Chen has honored that principle. After the formal ceremony, I walked alone through the facility's corridors, visiting each laboratory and workshop where brilliant minds were already at work on projects that would shape the next century. In the Advanced Materials Lab, Dr. Sarah Chen, who had taken a sabbatical from the University of Washington to join our team, was developing solid-state batteries that could revolutionize electric aircraft. In the Grid Integration Center, a team led by Dr. Kim Nakamura was designing storage systems that could make renewable energy as reliable as traditional power plants. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma, who was now running the European division of our operations from London. Saw the news coverage of the dedication. Helena would be beside herself with pride. Also, Marcus was apparently at some tech conference in Austin last week, telling anyone who would listen about his ex-wife's success. Some people never learn. The mention of Marcus no longer triggered the anxiety or anger it once would have. Through mutual acquaintances, I had learned that he was working as a freelance consultant, struggling to rebuild his reputation after the spectacular failure of Apex Digital Solutions. He had apparently told several people that he always knew Isabella had potential, and claimed partial credit for encouraging my scientific career. The revisionist history was so absurd it was almost endearing in its desperation. But Marcus's attempts to rewrite our past were irrelevant to the future I was building. 6 months ago, I had quietly established the Marcus Chen Memorial Scholarship, named not because he was dead, but because the man I had married had never really existed. The scholarship provided funding for women in STEM fields who were leaving abusive relationships and needed financial support to restart their careers. It was, I thought, a fitting way to transform the pain he had caused into something that could help others escape similar situations. As evening approached, I made my way to Helena's Memorial Garden, a peaceful space on the research center's grounds, where visitors could reflect on the intersection of science and humanity. Helena's ashes weren't buried there. She had requested they be scattered in the waters around the San Juan Islands, but a simple stone bench bore an inscription from her final letter to me. Never let anyone else's limitations become your own. Sat on that bench as the sun set over Puget Sound, surrounded by the sounds of fairy horns and seagulls that had become the soundtrack of my new life. In my briefcase were contracts for 3 new international partnerships, including a collaboration with the European Space Agency to develop battery systems for lunar research stations. Tomorrow, I would fly to Geneva to present our carbon capture integration technology to the United Nations Climate Council. The scope of what we had accomplished still sometimes took my breath away. Helena's initial patents had been worth millions, but the technology we had developed from her foundation was now valued in the billions. More importantly, independent analysis showed that widespread adoption of our systems could reduce global carbon emissions by 15% within the next decade. Yet sitting in that garden, I understood that the true measure of transformation wasn't in the financial success or even the environmental impact, though both mattered enormously. The real victory was in becoming someone who could no longer be diminished by someone else's fear or insecurity. A young woman approached the garden as I was preparing to leave, introducing herself as Dr. C. Lisa Park, one of the new researchers joining our quantum battery project. Dr. Chen, I hope you don't mind me interrupting, she said nervously. I just wanted to say that your story was part of what convinced me to leave my previous position. I was in a situation where my research was being constrained by people who didn't share my vision. Hearing about how you built this place made me believe it was possible to do science without compromise. I smiled, recognizing the careful language she used to describe what sounded like her own experience with professional manipulation. Dr. Park, compromise isn't always wrong, but there's a difference between healthy collaboration and allowing others to limit your potential. The challenge is learning to tell the difference. As I drove home to the house I had built on a bluff overlooking the San Juan Islands, not far from Helena's original laboratory, which now served as our company's research archive, I reflected on the letter that had changed everything. Helena's inheritance had been far more than money or patents. It had been permission to believe that I deserved a life without limitations, that my dreams were worth pursuing even when others couldn't envision them. The irony wasn't lost on me, that Marcus's cruelest act had become the catalyst for my greatest achievements. By throwing me out into that February snowstorm, he had inadvertently freed me to claim a destiny he never could have imagined. His limitations had become his own prison, while the woman he had tried to control had gone on to change the world. My phone rang as I pulled into my driveway, displaying David Kim's number. He was calling with news about the last legal loose, and from my former life. Isabella, I thought you should know that Marcus's final appeal was rejected today, David said. The Washington State Court of Appeals upheld every aspect of our original settlement. He can't challenge the inheritance, the patent rights, or the business assets. It's finally, completely over. Thank you, David, I replied, feeling a sense of closure that had been years in the making. Send him my regards and tell him I hope he finds what he's looking for. As I walked into my home, a space filled with my own choices, my own colors, my own vision of beauty, I understood that Marcus had already found what he was looking for. He had wanted to be important, to be seen as successful, to be admired for his achievements. The tragedy was that he had tried to build those things by diminishing someone else, rather than by creating value in the world. I had found something different. The knowledge that true security came from believing in your own worth and your ability to contribute something meaningful to humanity's future. Helena had given me the resources to discover that truth, but the courage to claim it had come from somewhere deeper, from the part of myself that had survived 9 years of diminishment and emerged stronger. Standing in my kitchen that night, preparing dinner while watching the lights of Friday Harbor twinkle across the water, I thought about the woman who had stood in a Seattle hotel room 2 years ago, clutching a certified letter and wondering if she was brave enough to claim the future it offered. She had been braver than she knew. And the future she had feared to hope for had turned out to be even more extraordinary than Helena had promised. Coming. Up next, you'll see 2 more stories we handpicked just for you. If this one struck a chord, you're going to love what's next. Tap to keep the journey going.